I will get started. So yeah, thanks for that lovely introduction, Joe. So yes, I collaborate with Duro Farr and Nick Tandavanic, and here's our moody photo to introduce the three of us. We make all of our work in collaboration as a group of three, and this is our studio here in Brighton, which is where I'm sat at the moment. Yes, we collaborate with the Mixed Reality Lab at the University of Nottingham, and all of the projects I'm going to talk to you about today have some degree of Mixed Reality Lab involvement. So to start with, I just want to sort of talk about what I think we're talking about in terms of glitches and bugs. You know, I'm thinking of glitches as something that is temporary and hard to repeat, whereas a bug is something that is permanent and a fault that needs addressing. A bug is a risk to the system. A glitch is something that can survive within the system. When I'm thinking about glitches, when I was preparing this talk, I'm thinking about you know, glitch as a kind of a discipline within video art going back, well, at least to the 70s, I would say. Glitch being an entire musical genre. You know, I have a wide array of music that is labelled glitch in my library. That it's a constant presence in visual art. It recurs constantly in science fiction, and one of the things that links across those things is it being a visual language that is responding to our technological condition. In our work, we don't really think of glitches as visible things, but as performative things. They may well be visible, but today I'm really going to address them in terms of their performative presence. More specifically, I thought back to the new aesthetic, which is a kind of mini movement that started about 10 years ago. Originally as a Tumblr by James Bridle, artist and theorist, and he was collecting images like the ones that you see here as reflective of some sort of shift in a kind of visual language. James and a number of others did a famous talk at South by Southwest, and the new aesthetic seems to sort of capture a particular sort of way in which glitches and digital presence were making themselves known, making themselves visible in the world. And this is James Bridle writing, blogging about it, saying one of the core themes of the new aesthetic has been our collaboration with technology, whether that's bots, digital cameras, or satellites, and whether that collaboration is conscious or unconscious. And a useful visual shorthand for that collaboration has been glitchy and pixelated imagery, a way of seeing that seems to reveal a blurring between the real and the digital, the physical and the virtual, the human and the machine. And that really links into the works that I'm going to talk to you about today. A number of projects came out of the new aesthetic. This is just one of them, small little playful projects taking online maps and mirroring them and reflecting them to create these kind of Rorschach style images, sort of reflecting on how sort of digital mapping creates new sort of visions of space and new possibilities for the manipulation of that vision. And I thought this was a very beautiful image of Venice. And so this is really sort of personally what I took from that discussion, and the ways in which that's informed my thinking is the idea that the new aesthetic is in some way a break with the digital as well as an accommodation with it, that it's some sort of disruption of the smoothness of the digital, and that we have a human appetite for the flawed in some way. It's a way of resisting the totalizing power of digital space, and that there is an element in which the human is expressed through a lack of perfection, which is why, you know, live drummers are still in existence, even though computers can drum much better than live drummers. So there is an element in which glitching is a disruption, a form of resistance, and a form of human presence in relation to the digital. The works I'm going to talk about in general today, two projects, are both mixed reality projects. They sit somewhere in the middle of the spectrum between physical space and virtual space, but actually the way that we tend to talk about them in Blast Theory and think about them is that they are an overlay of digital space onto physical space. And the inherent in that is you have these joins between those two. You have points of connection between the physical and the virtual. So first of all today I'm going to talk about glitches in relation to location. And I guess my talk today is sort of, some of it is sort of anecdotes about glitching, and some of it is attempting to think about what I like and dislike about that, or how we might respond to that. It's a mix of different ways of thinking about glitches, I suppose. So the first project that I want to talk about is Can You See Me Now from 2001, which is a game played online and on the streets. The public play online in a virtual model of the city, and performers, as you can see here, this is Paul Dunworth performing in Rotterdam, run through the streets of the actual city, and their avatars are shown in the virtual map moving around as they move in real space. And if those performers get close enough to the online players, they see them and knock them out of the game. And so the goal of the game for online players is to remain unseen or uncaught for as long as possible. This is a screen grab that I very rarely show anymore, because it's the very first version of Can You See Me Now in 2001. And at this point, what we have is essentially a 2D version of the city. In this case, it's Sheffield. And on the right-hand side of that window, you can see there is a series of icons there. There are 4 orange icons who are runners, who are the members of the public, and the white icon is the player of this of the game, who is using their arrow keys to move their white icon around and try and keep away from the orange icons. And so you can see just how crude and simple the first version of Can You See Me Now was. And so now I just want to show a film from 4 years later, by the time we've done the work a number of different times, and we took the work to Tokyo. And in this film, it gives a better description of the game and a sort of better flow of the game. And it also talks about some of the asymmetry between the physical and the virtual space. And that's something that I will sort of return to afterwards. I very much hope that this is going to play acceptably for you, or wherever you are on your connection. If it doesn't, apologies. Much of the video content that I'm going to share today is actually on our website, and so you can go and see it there. And also, if there's something in particular that you weren't able to see or didn't play properly, please let me know in the chat or in some way, and I will make sure that I share that and make that available for you. All right, so this is about a 4 or 5 minute clip of Can You See Me Now?
This is runner 6 to control. Can you hear me? Okay. Let people know that. Do you want me to announce it? This is runner 6. Okay. Runner 6 です。ブラストセオリーの Can You See Me Now へようこそ。
Though we gotta say goodbye for the summer, baby, I promise you this, I'll send you all my love every day in a letter, sealed with a kiss. Yes, it's gonna be a cold, lonely summer, but I'll feel the emptiness. I'll send you all my dreams every day in a letter, sealed with a kiss. I'll see you.
Can You See Me Now is an online game. To begin, players enter their name and then answer a question. What is the name of someone you haven't seen for a long time who you still think of? The player is then dropped at a random location in a virtual city. Using their arrow keys, they move their avatar through the streets to avoid being caught by the runners, who are represented in the virtual world in red. The runners are performers on the streets of the city. They are equipped with GPS receivers to fix their location on the streets, and handheld computers which are connected to the game via a GPRS wireless network.
Here's a map of the game area. This is me here, and you can see the red dots, they're online players.
This is Runner 4 to all online players. This is Blast Theory. Can you see me now from Tokyo Shibuya? This is sunny today and we are opening the game now.
This is Runner 5 welcoming Sumi Fumi back into the game. Nice to have you back again.
この近くにスミフミさんとあとエミリー・ベアさんがいますね。
To say a little hello to Emily and Tina who are out there. I believe Emily is on the east coast of the States and Tina may well be in England today.
The virtual city is an exact copy of the real city. However, online players exploit the subtle differences between the virtual city and the real city. Busy roads or steep hills require no effort online, but are major obstacles for the runners on the streets. And GPS varies in effectiveness over time as satellites move across the sky. It is less accurate or may not function at all in narrow streets or near tall buildings. In turn, the runners learn to make use of other properties of the technology. They lure online players into wide open spaces where GPS works well, or, knowing the properties of the virtual camera, they hide around corners as they collaborate with each other via walkie-talkies. The runners catch online players by getting to within 5 meters of their position. They then announce the sighting using the name of the person who has not been seen for a long time and take a photo of the vacant street. The website includes every photo taken by the runners to record a catch.
I'm trying to get Emily. Hello, Emily.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Gone on this ray, I just thought I'd let everyone hear this woman I'm standing next to. I'm not sure what she's advertising. Maybe somebody online sort of knows what's going on.
I can see the few players around here.
Okay, I'm crossing the road towards Musburger.
Where is Emily?
I have seen other Japanese at 10:30 on the street of the building. I'm taking photos. Emily and Tina around our sofa. You guys like it, isn't it?
I find this. Because I can see the Emily. And I can see the Emily. I think I can get it. This is Runner 3. I have seen Emily at 4:59 by Plastic Food. This is Runner 4 to Runner 3. Congratulations, good job, good catch.
Okay, so you get an idea of the structure of the work and the dramaturgy of the work. At the time that we created that work, we've got multiple particular technical challenges that we're trying to address and fold into the dramaturgy of this work. So no existing mobile networks could carry the data needed initially. And so for the first few years, we built an outdoor Wi-Fi network from scratch in each city by climbing up church steeples and multi-story car parks and bolting Wi-Fi antennas onto that and building our own network. And even then, the Wi-Fi could be unreliable, patchy, and slow. That version that you see there in Tokyo is the first time we're using GPRS, and because there was much better mobile data in Tokyo at that time. than there was in most of the rest of the world. Web browsers had very little support for 3D physics at that time, so we were working hard to deal with those limitations, and you can see that in the graphical design that we had. And many people are playing on low-speed dial-up connections. A 28K dial-up modem was still very typical at that time. And GPS is actually the biggest technology that we're using that is creating glitches that we are attempting to understand and then work with performatively. You've heard some of that mentioned in that video. GPS was the Global Positioning System. It's an American military technology with the specific goal of sending missiles long distances. And it was scrambled by the US military to be of a very low grade until May 2000. So when we're using it in research in 2000, and then for the creation of Can You See Me Now in 2001, it's the very most primitive moments of GPS. And you saw in that video that we've got sort of specific GPS receivers, which cost several £100 each to receive a GPS signal. Sorry, phone going off in the background. Apologies for that. So GPS signal could be just non-existent. There would be times where there just was no GPS signal. For a satellite might go down, there might be some other problem, but there's just nothing to be had. Or you have GPS black spots, areas where GPS is unavailable for some reason. Sometimes that was predictable, other times it would happen at random. And even when you could get a GPS fix, the accuracy, when we showed the work in Rotterdam, was measured at around 12 meters. So it's generally out by 12 meters in one direction or another. It could be as much as 100 meters out. And as you move around in a city, tall buildings bounce the GPS signal. They're sending signals from satellites. And as they hit the front of a very tall, flat building, that signal bounces, and that then creates anomalies where you can move 50 meters in a split second as your signal bounces from a building. And then if you get many tall buildings, that then is multiplied and GPS just falls over completely. And over time, you could have a problem where GPS offset would creep in. So the GPS is just consistently out in one direction or another. And so online players can move into positions where they're literally impossible to catch. They could be 5 meters offshore, for example, and without swimming, you are not going to get to them. And finally, as the satellites moved across the sky, at that point in time, accuracy would vary. So researchers from the Mixed Reality Lab prepared daily satellite forecasts that were similar to a weather forecast that would tell us at what times the accuracy would be at its best and at its worst. And we would then be attempting to manage that through the duration of a performance. And I'm sorry, I don't have a color version of this map, which then points out lots of color information. So apologies for that. But this is a map of Can You See Me Now in Rotterdam. It's on a promontory, so the black area on three sides is water, and you can see there that the arrows are pointing out areas where you've got very poor GPS at the bottom left and in the center, and areas on the right that are labeled grey where you've got poor GPS and poor Wi-Fi. So we're mapping the area. The researchers are building heat maps that show us where we can and cannot expect to get the most effective coverage. So how do we deal with these multiple glitches that are taking place all of the time and breaking our game? You know, if they aggregate, too many of those aggregate together, you have nothing. The game would literally fall apart. And so in developing it, we're finding ways that we can manage those glitches in the system. So you saw there the live walkie-talkie stream, and we created that on a separate channel, which meant that the street players, or runners as we would call them, are present even if they've lost GPS. We've got something where they have a presence within the game, and that sense of the voice was very powerful. It also means that if one performer loses connection, the others can still fill the walkie-talkie with chat, and the work still feels live and present. It feels like something is happening, even if someone has just vanished out of the game altogether. And the runners would kind of hide those dead spots that you just saw on that map. We would go out of our way to make it unclear to people where they were, so that we didn't allow people to take too much advantage of those uncatchable areas. So even, for example, where people are offshore, we would just make no mention of that and move away from them and wait for them to move back into a catchable area. Or we would lure online players into open areas where there was good GPS and Wi-Fi coverage. So we basically got sort of catch areas where we know the signals will be robust enough and quick enough that you can actually perform a catch. And we would often ignore people who were in areas of dead GPS, and that would then, after a while, they would get restless and come out into an area where they could be caught. And we coordinated with visual signs that were hidden to online players. We'd use hand signals to enable us to work together to deal with areas of dead space. So it's worth sort of pointing out that almost all of these strategies are completely hidden to the players online. We are attempting to create a performative world in which GPS is working just fine and is very accurate and is not an issue. But actually, but beneath the surface, we're working really hard to keep things moving. And another strategy is just faking our speed. So you'd move at a consistently slow pace that would give online players false confidence that they could outrun us. And then you put on a burst of speed, often in an area where you've got good GPS and Wi-Fi, to then go ahead and catch someone. So I wanted just to sort of briefly mention here the concept of seams and seamfulness, which Steve Benford, who's the professor who leads the Mixed Reality Lab, and Gabriele Giannacci, a distinguished scholar of theatre and performativity, they collaborated on a book called Mixed Reality Performance. And Steve Benford and other members of the Mixed Reality Lab explored the concept of seamfulness. I put a reference there on the right, a paper that came out of the MRL around this time, around seamful design. And that is the idea that that most forms of computer reality, and including mixed reality, try and hide these seams. They try and remove the seams by improving the technology, get better Wi-Fi, put more Wi-Fi antennas, try and get better quality GPS receivers and so on. We're working on a limited arts budget, and so most of those things are just impossible for us to do. Or you can try and hide the seams, and I've already mentioned that that's something that we do quite a lot of the time in Can You See Me Now. You just try and make it so that it's not immediately apparent. So in Can You See Me Now, for the online player, location is relative. You're seeing yourself here, and if someone else is getting closer to you, they feel like they're coming towards you. Whether that position is accurate or not, relative to you, they are coming towards you, and you are now going to have to run away from them, not to get caught. Both your position and the position of the avatar coming towards you might be wrong objectively, but as long as relatively something is going on, it feels like you are in a coherent world in which the real and the physical, the physical and the virtual space are seamlessly co-joined. And we manage the seams, and I've already sort of described some of these sort of fallback strategies, so that if the tech glitches or breaks, we can cover that. The most sort of renowned moment in Can You See Me Now's history, we showed Can You See Me Now in 20 different cities. We did a version of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, where on one given day, the entire data network in that part of Chicago was down. By this point, we're using telecoms data platforms, 2G and 3G, and there was no data. And we have a prestigious show that afternoon. We did an entire multi-hour long session of Can You See Me Now, where Nick, my collaborator Nick, was sat in a control room in the Museum of Contemporary Art, essentially moving the runners with around manually, while those of us who were performing as runners are out on the streets pretending that we are chasing people, and we're moving around for real. We're talking over the walkie-talkies, but actually our position in the world is being controlled by Nick, and so we're actually moving to where Nick has put us rather than moving under our own steam. And we were able to essentially fake an entire version. I think we call it creative performance rather than fake, but it is essentially faking an entire game of Can You See Me Now? You can reveal seams, you can make good and bad connectivity visible to users. In general, we did not do that in Can You See Me Now? And you can exploit seams, you can take advantage of some of these limitations. And as a way to do that, I want to go on and talk about another piece of work that we made after Can You See Me Now, called Uncle Roy All Around You, and how we dealt with positioning in that piece of work. So Uncle Roy All Around You was the next major location-based work that we made after Can You See Me Now, and by this point we felt that we had to create, or that we really wanted to create, an experience where the public are on the streets as well as online. And the public could be in both spaces, collaborating together, exploring a mixed reality city. And the goal of the game was to find Uncle Roy's office, and the work culminated in me being invited to make a year-long commitment to a stranger who had also played the game. And I'm going to show 2 bits of video which will give you a flavour of how Uncle Roy All Around You has kind of moved on from Can You See Me Now in terms of its design and its properties, but also a sense of sort of what the experience of playing Uncle Roy All Around You was like.
Uncle Roy All Around You is a game which sets online players alongside players on the streets of the city. Equipped with a handheld computer, street players are sent out into the city in search of Uncle Roy. Online players explore a virtual model of the same area of the city. They can follow the progress of street players and communicate with them via audio and text messages. Each street player has only 60 minutes to find Uncle Roy. Online players can uncover the location of Uncle Roy's office and so guide street players to their destination.
This is a game in which you walk around the surrounding area using these. This map shows the game area. To move around it, tap on the Me icon and drag it.
Okay, so there you get a sort of flavour of how the game works, where people are collaborating between the virtual space and physical space, and you get a sense of the devices we're using. We're now using mobile data for that. Now I'd like to go on and show another little clip of the video. This is about 30 or 40 minutes into the experience. This player, Jen, has been exploring, in this case, London, trying to look for Uncle Roy. She's collaborating with online players, and one of them in particular has found Uncle Roy's office. One of the online players found Uncle Roy's office and has helped Jen to find it. And this is the moment at which Jen gets a message to say that she's been successful and to locate her there.
I met 12 out of the place, and I just buzzed Roy's buzzer.
So I'm going to stop it there. So you see, this is the moment where the online world and the physical world are connected via this webcam. That the online player suddenly gets a camera view of Jen arriving into Uncle Roy's office, and so they are then connected. And actually, they are both asked the same question about whether they would be willing to offer a stranger support in a crisis, and that results in the kind of pairing that I mentioned earlier. But the thing I wanted to talk about here is the problem we had as we began to make this work is GPS receivers were still sort of external devices that were several £100 per unit. GPS was not built into mobile tech in those days, and so we tried different systems of locating and tracking street players as they moved around. And what you're seeing here is, on the left, a wide view for the street player, and down at the bottom right there you can see a button that says zoom in. If you click on that zoom in button, you get the view on the right, which is the zoomed in view of the same position. In this case, it's someone coming just out of the ICA to start the game. And as we were developing the game, all of the technological solutions that we had for positioning failed one by one. And we realized that we were not going to be able to locate street players as they moved around, which for a game that was entirely predicated on exploring the city and finding things was a major problem. So the observation that we had was that at that point in London, to get around, you would use a map, the A to Z, which was a book-sized map with 150 pages of the city on it. And the observation we had was that if you could zoom into the city and see all of those people with all of their A to Zs open, it would be highly likely that the page they're on is actually where they are, because you look around you for where you are. And that therefore we might be able to create a system where people move themselves and we could then infer their position, even though we didn't know their position. And that's exactly what Uncle Royal Around You was based on. So you saw earlier on Sheila Gilani, who's the artist who was introducing people to the game at the beginning. She's showing them how to drag the me icon. And that is in fact how we assume that we know where you are. Where you put the me icon, we assume that you were there. And research that was conducted by the MRL afterwards showed that almost everyone who took part in Uncle Royal Around You believed that it either had GPS built in or some other form of tracking technology. They had no idea that they could have essentially spoofed the whole system and moved themselves around on the map without actually physically moving in real space. So we found a kind of a performative strategy to deal with, in this case, quite a significant bug. So I was interested to hear you, Piotr, talking about boundaries in terms of your upcoming conference, because that was one of the things that I was thinking about in terms of glitches, and so I'm going to talk about that now. So much of the work that we make, both these two projects that I've shown you, but many of the others, the work has an uncertain boundary. That might be an uncertain physical boundary, but more typically it's an uncertain performative boundary. It's not quite clear who is in the work and who's not in the work, and where the work ends and where the work begins. In Can You See Me Now, there is actually a hard edge to the game area, but it's off screen and quite hard to find, and so it feels as if you can go in any direction. And in Uncle Royal Around You, you could actually walk without end out of the game area. As I mentioned, we didn't actually know where you were in any case, and some players on the street actually walked over a mile outside of the mapped area that we were using without them realizing, and then would correct and come back. So you're not sure where the game ends geographically, what the Cartesian boundaries are of the game, but you're also not sure sort of socially and performatively who's in the game, who is taking part in this and who is not. And that's a rich source of performative opportunity in terms of the work that we make. So we made a more recent work of ours is Operation Black Antler, which is an immersive theatre project made in collaboration with Hydra Cracker, in which members of the public go undercover to infiltrate a far-right group. The structure of the work is that 9 members of the public meet on a street corner, sent there by a text message, and the work begins from there. When we premiered this work in Brighton, a homeless man who begged regularly at the cash point noticed that groups of 9 people kept gathering on a half-hourly schedule, and asked one group what they were doing and why they were here. He gradually learned how the work, what the work was and what was going on, and then, without breaking it, would say cryptic things to people as they gathered, waiting for the experience to start. And he folded himself into the work. He essentially became a performer in the work. We learned about this by people coming and saying, "Wow, the homeless guy at the cash point, he was amazing," and that's how we realised that what was going on. And so he has essentially given himself the role as a performer in this work, and to the 9 members of the public who are witnessing that, he is an integral and fully realised part of our work. We created a piece of work called A Machine to See With, which is a work where you're sent on through the streets to rob a bank, and showed it at the Sundance Film Festival. During that presentation, someone who had taken part on one day turned up at the start position the next day in a van and offered to pick people up and drive them to the bank. He more or less broke their experience, but he also gave them a complete once-in-a-lifetime experience. Obviously, we're fairly unnerved because that is the degree of safety that we were able to offer is non-existent in that situation. But again, it's a sign of someone who has been within the work, then deciding that they want to participate in a new way. And I'll go on to talk about an extreme example of that in just a minute. In A Machine to See With, one of the pieces of the work is a car is parked in a multi-story car park, and first one participant, then a second participant get into this car. They meet each other for the first time, and from there they're buddied up, and they then plan to rob the bank together. People who were living or working overlooking that car park would often assume that it was drug dealing and would call the police, and so the police would arrive at this car and ask the people what they were doing, and that was normally straightened out. But you can see that within a work robbing a bank, this is both confluent as well as disruptive to the piece. It's a kind of glitch dramaturgically. It's sort of breaking the experience because they have to explain it, like, oh, we're doing this art event. We're not dealing drugs, but they also have this moment where the police are suddenly walking towards them, and the experience suddenly seems dramatically more real than it might otherwise. So those are starting to be sort of performative strategies, and I've talked about performativity sort of all the way through here, but I wanted to sort of mention this idea that the computer is some sort of black box to most people. Most of us have no idea what's happening inside a computer, and we actually can project our own fantasies and expectations onto it. And that's how that self-reported positioning works, that people are attributing to the computer a much higher degree of ability and competence than it's actually capable of. And another example of that is that those mobile handsets that people are using in Uncle Royal around you would crash from time to time, and a performer on a bicycle would have to race to wherever that person was, take their device from them, say, oh, I'm sorry, the device has crashed, let me reset it for you, reset the device, give it back to them, and then say, yes, you're good to go again now, you can start again. What we learned is that actually we could deal with that in a much more interesting way, performatively. So the performer dressed in a suit, they would turn up to where that person was, where the participant was, and then just say nothing to them except, can I have your device? They would take the device away, walk several meters away from the performer, from the participant, turn their back to them. They would reset the crash device. then they would give it back to the member of the public and say, you can carry on now. And members of the public would then fold that experience into the espionage world of Uncle Royal around you. And in general, they were unaware that this was a software problem that we'd come to fix. They felt that this was dramaturgically within the world of the experience itself. So in a software system, in some sense, the human is the glitch. The human is unpredictable. They can be uncertain, or they can be outright disobedient. And software systems are always trying to manage that problem and that challenge. And so, in many of our works, we've not only dealing with the performativity ourselves, but we also have environments where the public are interacting with each other within the work, and we are inviting them, educating, and even disciplining them to play that role. And so you're sort of learning to perform for one another, and that is an opportunity as well as a challenge. We made a piece of work called Day of the Figurines, which is a 24-day game played by a text message. And in it, you choose a figurine, a physical figurine, when you come to start the game, and a name. And then you enter a fictional town that you explore over the next 24 days. And that's all done within character, but participants sometimes choose to step outside their character. And so you've got multiple forms of presentation happening at once. So for example, when we showed the work in Berlin at the Hebel, one player called Hassan decided that they would pretend to be a doctor. And so whenever they met someone, he would introduce himself as a doctor. There is no sort of role in the game of the doctor. There's no sort of function as a doctor, but Hassan had learned some strategies for how you could manage health within the game, and that gave him some sort of credibility, and people treated him as the doctor, and it becomes part of the gameplay. He's just having fun with what kind of role he can play. Or in a game in Singapore, a plan sends a message saying to another player called Miss Biscuit, saying, say, Miss Biscuit, hello, are you a volunteer at the museum, which is the museum where the work was being shown. This is described in Performing Presence, Gabriele Giannacci's book. And so he's stepping outside of his role as Tin Man and talking to Miss Biscuit about an exchange that they've had in real life. That's just a photo of the figurine that you pick. That's Queenie, so that's just a sense of sort of what level of fiction you are drawing on, which is this tiny plastic figurine and one name and a couple of characteristics that you decide on at the beginning of the game. And they're here on a magnetic board, which is represents the town. And here's a wider view of that magnetic game board, with all of the places in the imaginary town in which the game takes place. Once an hour, we would update this game board with the locations of every player where they had moved in the last hour, and we use this orchestration interface video projected down onto the board to be able to move people. So here you're seeing the guts of the system. Initially we thought we would keep this hidden, but actually it became a real attraction that once an hour people would gather to watch the updating of the positions of all the players in the game as we move them along these lines. That's sort of where they were is one end of the line, and where they now are is the other end of the line. This is at the Sonar Festival. So I mentioned the sort of people going outside of the game norms. I thought it might be interesting to talk about the most extreme example of that, and that is that during a game of Can You See Me Now in Cologne, 3 players kidnapped a performer. 3 online players turned up in the real city and kidnapped a performer. And I've got a nice little piece of video here with Sheila Galani, again, who is an associate artist of Blast Theory and a fantastic artist in her own right, talking about this experience.
It was very unsettling. It was very weird. It was when the boundaries between performance, life, I don't know, it just all mashed in together and was very weird. It was a very, very weird hour. That's what I remember. So what happens is, yeah, people are playing online and we're running around outside. So we're trying to catch online players, and we have to match up where we are physically in space with where they are using GPS, basically. But when the piece moved into more cities and being around people, it had very different demands, and you became aware of really different things. So we were in Cologne, it was the last night, the piece had been going really well, loads of people had been playing, and I had a really sort of uneasy feeling. I had this really strange feeling as it started to get darker and darker. I don't know what it was, but I just had this feeling that something wasn't quite right. And all of a sudden, runner, I don't know what number Matt would have been, but his runner number, say runner 1, just honest to God, just shot off the screen. I don't understand how he's A, moving so fast, and B, why he's kind of like disappeared off the game area. What the hell is going on? Then all of a sudden we got over the walkie-talkie some kind of message. They said something like, we have runner 1, blah, blah, blah. I really can't remember what was said. We got told almost very quickly to shut the game down, or whether we were still playing, not really understanding what had happened. Matt had basically been bundled into the boot of a car and driven off. He had got some bruises on him, and it had been quite. It was very unsettling. The guys that did it, they had been playing online and had thought it would be a good thing to get one of us, and had said that they were going to get the girl, which was me. And so they had been watching me for quite a while, and then had suddenly, I don't know, had a moment of realisation that actually it might be really weird if a load of men bundled a woman into the boot of a car. So they went for Matt instead.
Okay, so happy to talk about that more, but I'm going to move on. I want to wrap up fairly soon now. So, even in works like Operation Black Antler, which I mentioned, which is an immersive theatre work, although the work doesn't take place within software, it's still very heavily supported by software, and we built a software platform for sending text messages in the background as a kind of orchestration system for the work. So our work is often dependent on, even if it all takes place entirely within software. And in that context, as I mentioned, the human is always a disruption, or possibly an augmentation of the software system. And so when we create work, we try and design for emergent behavior. This is a term from games design, which is to suggest that people can do things that are not necessarily within the rules or within the affordances of the world. They can create new possibilities for themselves. So the classic example is poker, for example, where there's nothing in the rules about poker about bluffing. Bluffing is an emergent behavior that comes about from a game where you're trying to conceal your intentions from the other players. So we're trying to create a possibility space that is broad as possible, not as broad as kidnapping intent necessarily, although of course we have made a piece of work in which we did exactly that. But we're trying to make allowances for human interaction within the system that you might think of as a glitch, but it's in fact a kind of a rich new set of possibilities in terms of how you perform. And you may have noticed that much of the work is experienced alone, even if it is in social spaces. If you look at both Uncle Royal Around You and Can You See Me Now, the online players are playing at a terminal. It's you and your PC, and street players are generally alone as well. So that's not an accidental part of our work, because we're interested in exploring a sense of isolation and that is often engendered by digital spaces. All right, I am going to stop there.